John dear, what an amazing apartment. My mother's voice echoed through the entrance hall of my penthouse, but there was something forced about her tone of admiration. We didn't know you were so well off. I stood motionless in the doorway, watching my family scatter around the main room like tourists lost in a museum. My mother, Patricia, walked in slow circles, delicately touching the Carrara marble of the fireplace. My father, Robert, stood frozen in front of the glass wall that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. And my older sister, Amanda, was discreetly filming everything with her cell phone. 2 years. 2 years since they completely blocked me after my divorce. 2 years of absolute silence, as if I had died the moment my marriage to Jennifer ended. And now they were there, in my living room, breathing the rarefied air of the 42nd floor. My name is John Miller. I'm 34 years old, and until this Saturday afternoon, my family believed I was living in a miserable apartment, eating instant noodles and crying over the ex-wife who destroyed me. They couldn't have been more wrong. How did you get my address? I asked, closing the door behind me. The sound of the latch echoed in the black marble hall, an echo that seemed to carry the weight of our entire broken family history. Amanda was the first to recover from the initial shock. She had always been the most pragmatic of the family, the one who calculated every move. The doorman let us up when we said we were your family, she replied, quickly tucking her phone into her pocket. He said you've been living in the penthouse for over a year. A year and a half, to be exact. But who was counting? I watched my parents move through the room like ghosts, visiting a life they never imagined I could have. The apartment was 4,000 square feet, with 3 bedrooms, an office overlooking Central Park, a kitchen that could feed a small army, and a private terrace that cost more than most people earn in a decade. John's son, my father finally found his voice. This must cost a fortune. How did you manage? The question hung in the air, laden with all the assumptions they had made about my life over the past 2 years. Jennifer had made sure to spread her version of the story to anyone who would listen. John lost everything in the divorce. John is broke. John can't get over the breakup. My family bought every word. Would you like to sit down? I offered, gesturing toward the Italian white leather sofa that cost more than their car. I imagine you came here for a specific reason. The discomfort between us was palpable. They positioned themselves on the sofa like an official delegation, maintaining a formal distance that made the nature of this visit clear. This wasn't a family gathering. It was a negotiation. Actually, Patricia began, adjusting the vintage purse on her lap, we came because we received some disturbing news about Jennifer. Interesting. For the past 2 years, any mention of my ex-wife's name resulted in lectures about how I needed to move on and accept reality. Now, suddenly, they wanted to talk about her. What kind of news? I asked, settling into the Italian designer armchair that was strategically positioned so I could observe both my visitors and the breathtaking view of Manhattan. Amanda exchanged a nervous glance with our parents before answering. She's facing some problems. Serious problems. The silence that followed was heavy with expectation. They expected me to show concern, maybe even offer help. After all, that's what old John would have done. The John they knew before the divorce always rushed to solve everyone's problems. But the John sitting in that $15,000 armchair was a completely different person. If you're enjoying discovering how a family can completely change their opinion of someone when they discover their true wealth, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the unfolding of this story full of twists and turns. Because what my family didn't know was that while they had been treating me like a failure for the past 2 years, I had been methodically building an empire that would make Jennifer deeply regret every cruel word she had said about me in divorce court. Serious problems, I repeated, savoring each syllable. Interesting how life has these twists and turns, don't you think? The tension in the room was almost palpable. My parents shifted on the couch like uncomfortable children in the principal's office, while Amanda continued to avoid my direct gaze. They had come here with a clear agenda, but my reaction wasn't following the script they had expected. John, she's facing financial difficulties, my mother finally blurted out, the words coming out as if each one weighed a ton. It seems things didn't turn out as she planned after the divorce. Ah, what delicious irony. Jennifer, the woman who had convinced my family that I was a failed loser, now needed sympathy. The same Jennifer who had spread lies about my character, my mental stability, and my ability to move on. And you came here to tell me this because? I asked, crossing my legs and leaning back in my chair. The afternoon sunlight created a golden halo around me, while they remained in relative shadow. It was Amanda who answered, her voice laden with poorly disguised guilt. Because we thought you might want to know. Maybe even help. The audacity was impressive. Absolutely impressive. For 2 full years, this same family had treated me as if I were radioactive. 2 years of unreturned phone calls, messages left in a vacuum, invitations to birthdays and holidays that simply stopped coming. 2 years of hearing through third parties how they repeated Jennifer's poisonous narratives about my post-divorce mental breakdown. Jennifer had been strategic, I must admit. She planted her seeds of misinformation with surgical precision. She told my family how I had begged her not to file for divorce. How I had threatened to hurt myself if she left me. How I was obsessively trying to win her back, calling and texting constantly. Every word was a carefully constructed lie. The truth? I had asked for the divorce first. 6 months before she even mentioned the word. I discovered her betrayals through credit card bills that showed romantic dinners at restaurants we never went to together, hotel reservations on weekends when she said she was working, expensive gifts bought for someone who was definitely not me. When I confronted Jennifer with the evidence, she didn't deny it. Instead, she laughed. She laughed and said I had finally figured it out. She said she had been bored with me for years and had found someone more exciting, more successful, more everything. I simply replied, "Great. I'll get the divorce papers ready tomorrow." But Jennifer couldn't accept that I had taken control of the narrative. So she orchestrated her own version of events, one in which she was the brave heroine escaping an unstable husband, and I was the pathetic villain who refused to accept reality. My family bought it. Every word. We made a mistake, John, my father said, his voice trembling. We believed what she told us. About you having difficulty accepting the end of the marriage. Difficulty accepting, I murmured, a cold smile playing on my lips. It's interesting how language can distort reality, isn't it, Dad? Patricia leaned forward, her eyes pleading. Son, we didn't know about your financial situation. If we had known you were doing so well. She stopped mid-sentence, realizing what she had just confessed. If we had known you had money, we would have treated you differently. Ah, I said, nodding slowly. Now we're getting to the heart of the matter. Amanda tried to do damage control. That's not what she meant, John. It's just that, well, Jennifer told us you'd lost your job, that you were struggling to pay rent on a tiny apartment, that you were what, Amanda? I interrupted. Go on, finish the sentence. Jennifer said I was what? The silence stretched like an abyss between us. Finally, it was my mother who whispered, that you were living with roommates and working temporary jobs. That you had developed drinking problems. Drinking problems. That was new even to me. And you believed it, I said, not as a question, but as a statement. You believed it without ever checking with me. Without a single call to ask if I was okay. Without a single text to ask if I needed help. The shame radiated from them like heat from a radiator. They knew. They knew they had chosen to believe the most convenient version of the story, the one that absolved them of any responsibility to support their son and brother during what they believed to be the worst period of his life. Jennifer is very convincing, Robert muttered, as if that were an acceptable excuse. Jennifer is a sociopath, I replied calmly. But that's nothing new to anyone here. You always knew exactly what kind of person she was. You simply chose to ignore it because it was easier than dealing with the complexity of the truth. During our marriage, my family had tolerated Jennifer out of obligation, not affection. They saw how she manipulated me, how she used tears as a weapon, how she always found a way to be the victim in any conflict. But when the marriage ended, it was easier to blame the unstable husband than to acknowledge that they had allowed a predator into our family circle for 5 years. So, I said, standing up and walking to the picture window, tell me. What exactly happened to dear Jennifer? Amanda exchanged glances with our parents before answering. Her boyfriend left her. Apparently, he wasn't as successful as he claimed to be. And the apartment she was renting, well, she can't afford it anymore. What a tragedy, I said, without turning around. Below, Manhattan stretched out like a kingdom I had conquered through hard work and iron determination. And how exactly does that affect our family? John, she's about to lose her apartment, Patricia said, her voice laden with artificial urgency. And you know how proud she is. She would never admit she needs help, but... I turned slowly, a genuine smile forming on my face. But has she mentioned to you that it would be terrible if she had to move somewhere cheaper? Has she casually let slip that she's surprised at how expensive it is to live alone? Maybe she even whispered something about how unfair it would be if her ex-husband was living comfortably while she struggles. The expressions on their faces told me everything I needed to know. Jennifer had orchestrated this visit with the same military precision she used to destroy our marriage. She planted the right seeds in the right minds, knowing exactly how they would react. How convenient, I said, returning to my armchair. The same woman who painted me as a hopeless failure now needs financial rescue. And you, who abandoned me based on her lies, now want me to be the knight in shining armor. The reality of what they were asking finally began to sink into the thin air of my penthouse. They hadn't come here out of genuine remorse or because they had finally seen through Jennifer's manipulations. They had come because they had discovered I had money and Jennifer needed it. I leaned forward, my eyes fixed on each of them. Let me make something clear to you. During the 2 most difficult years of my life, when I could have really used a supportive family, you chose to believe the lies of a woman you knew to be manipulative. Now that you've discovered I'm not the failure she painted me to be, you want me to be the hero in her redemption story. If you're following this family twist and want to know how a man builds an $8 million empire while his family believes he's failing at life, don't miss the next block where I reveal exactly how I turned my pain into absolute power. Because what they didn't know yet was that every lie Jennifer spread, every humiliation my family imposed on me, had been fuel for a transformation that would make them all deeply rethink their definitions of success and failure. Because, Amanda said, her voice taking on a tone of desperation I hadn't heard in years, she's threatening to do some terrible things if she doesn't get help. Interesting. Very interesting. What kind of terrible things? I asked, crossing my arms and leaning back in my chair. The Manhattan afternoon cast long shadows across the room, and I could see the distorted reflection of my family in the glass of the coffee table. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. John, she said she's going to tell everyone that you abused her. That you were violent during the marriage. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. For 20 seconds, no one breathed. Then I started laughing. It wasn't a laugh of humor. It was the sound someone makes when they finally understand the full extent of a manipulation so elaborate that it is impressive in its cruelty. She already tried that one, I said, my voice cutting through my own laughter. During the divorce. Remember? When she showed up in court with a black eye that she caused herself by hitting her face on the corner of the table. The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of people confronted with a truth they had chosen to ignore. Our building's security cameras showed everything, I continued, my voice now completely calm. Jennifer alone in the apartment, deliberately hurting herself to frame me. The judge almost jailed her for perjury. Amanda was pale as a sheet. You never told us about the cameras. You never asked, I replied simply. You heard her version and decided it was the truth. Why? Because it was more dramatic? Because it fit better with the narrative that I was the villain. Patricia began to cry. Real tears this time, not the calculated tears I had seen so many times during my childhood when she wanted my father to do something for her. John, we didn't know. You didn't want to know, I corrected. There's a fundamental difference between the two. I stood up and walked over to a built-in wall cabinet. I opened a drawer and took out a black leather binder. It was thick, well organized, with colored dividers separating different sections. Do you know what this is? I asked, holding the binder up for everyone to see. They shook their heads in unison, like frightened children. This is the binder my divorce lawyer put together documenting all of Jennifer's lies during the legal proceedings. 143 pages of evidence, affidavits, medical records, and witness statements proving that every accusation she made against me was fabricated. I returned to my chair, the folder weighing in my hands like a weapon. The attempted domestic violence allegation is in the red section. The lies about my financial stability are in the blue. The false allegations about alcoholism are in the yellow. And the recordings of her admitting she was making it all up to completely destroy me are in the green section. My father was pale. Recordings. Jennifer has an interesting quirk, I explained, opening the folder and flipping through the organized pages. When she drinks, and she drinks a lot, she likes to brag. Especially to her friends about how smart she is, how she can manipulate people. I recorded several of these conversations. I took a small digital recorder from the folder and placed it on the coffee table. Would you like to hear the part where she explains how she planned to destroy my reputation with you specifically? The panic in their eyes was palpable. Amanda tried to protest, "John, we don't need to." I pressed the play button. Jennifer's drunken voice filled the room. "That idiot John thinks he's so smart, but I've already turned the whole family against him. I told them he's broke, drinking, begging me to come back. They believed everything. They're as pathetic as he is. Now he has no one. No family, no support. Just like I wanted." I stopped the recording. The silence in the room was deafening. "This recording has a date and timestamp," I said calmly. "It was made 3 weeks after our divorce was finalized. 7 months before you decided to cut me off completely." Patricia was sobbing openly now. "God, John. What have we done?" "You did exactly what she planned for you to do," I replied. "She studied our family dynamics for 5 years. She knew you always favored emotional drama over hard facts. She knew that if she presented a narrative where she was the suffering heroine and I was the disturbed villain, you would choose the more theatrical side." I stood up again and positioned myself in front of the panoramic window. Below, the city bustled with millions of people living their own personal tragedies and triumphs. "For 2 years," I said, my voice echoing against the glass, "I rebuilt my entire life. No family. No support system. Completely alone. Do you know how I found out my grandmother had died? By reading the obituary in the online newspaper 2 days after the funeral." The silence behind me was deep and heavy with guilt. "Do you know how I spent my 33rd birthday? Working until 2 in the morning on a project that gave me the seed money to buy this penthouse. Alone. Because my family had decided I no longer existed." I turned to face them. "And now you're here, in the house I built with the money I earned during the years you abandoned me, asking me to financially rescue the woman who orchestrated my social and family isolation." Amanda tried one last manipulative ploy. "John, we made terrible mistakes. But Jennifer, she's really desperate. And regardless of what happened between you, she was your wife for 5 years." "She was my wife," I interrupted. "For 5 years during which she systematically destroyed my self-esteem, isolated me from friends, sabotaged professional opportunities, and built a narrative where I was emotionally and financially dependent on her. And when I decided to divorce her because of these manipulations, she used you as weapons to continue hurting me." I closed the folder and put it back in the cabinet. "The question you should be asking yourselves is not whether I'm going to help Jennifer," I said, returning to my chair. "The question is, why the hell do you think you have the right to walk into my house after 2 years of complete silence and make any kind of request?" Robert tried a different approach. "John, we're your family." "No," I said, my voice cutting like a knife. "Family doesn't abandon you. Family doesn't choose to believe lies instead of checking the truth. Family doesn't cut off contact completely based on secondhand gossip." I stood up and walked to the living room door. "You haven't been my family for 2 years. You're strangers who share my DNA and just found out I have money." I opened the door and gestured toward the hallway. "And now, I'm going to politely ask you to leave my house." They didn't move immediately. They were processing the reality that the failed John they had abandoned was not only thriving without them, but also had no intention of saving the woman who had destroyed our family. "John," Patricia whispered, "please. It can't end like this." I looked at her, this woman who raised me, who taught me to ride a bike, who comforted me when I had my first heartbreak. This woman who chose to believe Jennifer's lies instead of trusting the son she had known for 34 years. "You're right," I said finally. "It can't end like this." For a moment, I saw hope blossom on their faces. "Because I haven't shown you yet," I continued, "what really happens when someone tries to use my family to blackmail me. Want to find out how a man who lost everything can turn pain into power and build an impenetrable fortress against those who betrayed him? Keep following this story because what comes next will show that sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply to live well. But first, I needed them to fully understand what they had lost when they chose to believe Jennifer instead of trusting me. And for that, I needed to show them exactly what I had built during the 2 years they considered me dead to the family. Do you want to know how? I asked, gesturing toward the panoramic view of Manhattan. How did someone you considered a total failure manage to build all this? I returned to my seat, but this time I didn't sit down. I remained standing, a position of authority that made clear the new dynamic between us. During the first 3 months after you cut me off, I began, my voice taking on the clinical tone I used in corporate presentations. I did exactly what Jennifer predicted I would do. I fell into depression. I stopped shaving. I lived on delivery food and Netflix. Patricia tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand, silencing her. But in the 4th month, something interesting happened. I got a call from the legal department of my old job. They were being sued by a medical technology company for patent infringement. A patent that, ironically, I had developed 3 years earlier and that the company had forgotten to register properly. I walked over to a built-in shelf and took out a blue folder. This folder contains the complete documentation of 17 technological innovations I developed during my 8 years at Dataflow Systems. Innovations that generated millions in revenue for them, but were never properly credited or compensated. I opened the folder and took out an official document. When the company fired me, yes, Amanda, I was fired, I didn't resign as Jennifer told you, they made a crucial mistake. They violated the intellectual property clause of my contract by not informing me about the registration of patents derived from my work. I held out the document so they could see the official letterhead. This is the settlement agreement. $3.2 million in retroactive compensation, plus perpetual copyrights on the technologies I developed. Signed exactly a year and a half ago. The silence in the room was absolute. Robert was as pale as a sheet. But that was just the beginning, I continued, putting the document away. You see, during those dark months when Jennifer painted me as a loser and you abandoned me, I had a lot of free time. Time to think. Time to analyze. Time to plan. I walked over to another section of the bookcase and took out an ultra-thin laptop. I discovered something fascinating about the company that fired me. They were using my technology not only in the products we developed together, but also in highly lucrative government contracts. Contracts that required full disclosure of intellectual property. I opened the laptop and placed it on the coffee table, the screen facing them. This is the consulting platform I launched. Miller Tech Solutions. Specializing in intellectual property auditing for medical technology companies. The screen showed a sleek, professional website with logos of Fortune 500 companies as clients. Over the past 18 months, my company has identified intellectual property violations worth $47 million. My standard commission is 25% of the amount recovered. Amanda choked. 12 million. 12.3 million, to be exact, I corrected. Plus the 3.2 from the initial settlement. This coverage cost $8.5 million. The rest is invested in a diversified portfolio that generates approximately $60,000 monthly in passive income. I closed the laptop and put it back on the shelf. All of this, I said, gesturing again toward the apartment, was built during the 2 years you considered me dead. 2 years in which Jennifer spread lies about my mental stability and you chose to believe her instead of checking with me. I returned to my armchair, watching their expressions of utter shock. But you know what's really interesting? I asked, crossing my legs. Jennifer didn't do all this by accident. She knew exactly what she was doing when she destroyed my reputation with you. I picked up my phone and navigated to a specific folder. 2 months before filing for divorce, Jennifer began to have serious financial problems. Her salary as a marketing manager couldn't support the lifestyle she wanted. She needed access to my resources, but she also needed an exit strategy in case I discovered her betrayals. I showed them the phone screen. These are the searches she did on Google. How to get lifetime alimony in a divorce. Strategies to prove a spouse's mental instability. How to alienate a husband's family. The last search made Patricia physically recoil. She studied you, I continued, putting my phone away. For 5 years, she observed our family dynamics. She knew you always prioritized emotional drama over verifiable facts. She knew Mom was always more protective of women she perceived as vulnerable. She knew Dad avoided conflict at all costs. I stood up again and walked to the window. So she created a narrative where she was the suffering heroine and I was the unstable villain. And when you bought into that narrative without question, she got exactly what she wanted. She completely isolated me from any family support system. I turned to face them. Her plan was perfect. Almost perfect. Amanda finally found her voice. Almost. I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. Jennifer made one fundamental mistake. She assumed I would collapse without you. That I would become dependent, desperate, easy to manipulate. She was counting on that to negotiate a generous lifetime allowance. I walked back to them, stopping directly in front of the sofa. Instead, I discovered something liberating about living without a toxic support system. I discovered that when you have no one to impress, no one to please, no one whose expectations you need to manage, you can focus 100% of your energy on building something truly meaningful. If you're following this incredible transformation from a man abandoned by his family to a multi-millionaire entrepreneur, don't miss the next few moments because we haven't finished discovering how deep the planning behind this total reconstruction was. Every lonely night I spent in this apartment, he said, gesturing around. Every holiday I spent working instead of trying to mend broken relationships, every moment I chose to invest in myself instead of begging for your approval, was an investment that paid off many times over. Patricia was crying silently. John, we didn't know. You didn't want to know, I interrupted, my voice sharp. There's a crucial difference. For 2 whole years, you had multiple opportunities to seek me out. To verify Jennifer's version. To ask how I was really doing. But you chose the comfort of ignorance. I turned back to the window, watching the sun begin to set over Manhattan. And now, I said without turning around, you're here because you've discovered that the failure you abandoned has become more successful than any of us ever imagined. And Jennifer, the heroine of her story, is begging for crumbs. The silence behind me was heavy with guilt and belated understanding. So tell me, I said, finally turning to face them. Exactly what kind of help do you think I should give to the woman who systematically destroyed my family life and to the family who chose to believe her instead of trusting me? Because what they didn't yet know was that Jennifer wasn't just facing random financial problems. Her problems were much more specific, much more targeted, and much more connected to my new life than any of them could imagine. The answer is no, I said simply, watching their expressions change from hope to confusion, then to despair. I'm not giving Jennifer a penny. Amanda leaned forward, her voice taking on a pleading tone. John, you don't understand. She's really desperate. If you don't help. If I don't help, I interrupted, walking over to my desk and pulling out a red folder they hadn't seen yet, she'll have to face the natural consequences of her actions. Something that should have happened a long time ago. I opened the folder on the coffee table. The first few pages showed legal documents, contracts, printed emails. Do you want to know why Jennifer is facing financial problems? I asked, my voice taking on the cold tone of a prosecutor presenting evidence. It's not bad luck. It's not the real estate market. And it's definitely not because her boyfriend left her. I picked up the first document and held it out to them. This is the lease for the expensive apartment Jennifer can no longer afford. Do you know who owns the building? The silence in the room was deafening. Miller Property Holdings, I said, pointing to the name at the top of the document. My company. Jennifer has been living in an apartment I've owned for 18 months. Patricia gasped. You're her landlord. I corrected. Her lease expires at the end of the month. And since she's been behind on rent for 3 consecutive months, it won't be renewed. I took the next document from the folder. This is Jennifer's credit report from the last 2 years. Notice the interesting pattern here. I pointed to a specific section. Every time she got a promising job or an important client for her consulting business, something happened. The project was cancelled. The contract was terminated. The client disappeared. Amanda was pale. John, you didn't do that. I did exactly that, I replied, without a hint of remorse in my voice. Every opportunity that came her way over the last 2 years crossed my desk first. Miller Tech Solutions has a very extensive network in the field of technology and digital marketing. And Jennifer burned a lot of bridges when she spread lies about my professional character. I stood up and walked to the window, watching Manhattan stretch out endlessly below. You see, I continued without turning around, while Jennifer was telling everyone I was a broken failure, she didn't realize something crucial. The people she was telling these stories to? Many of them knew me professionally. And when they started receiving evidence that she was deliberately lying, I turned to face them. Well, let's just say her reputation in the industry became problematic. I took another document from the folder. This is an email Jennifer sent to a potential client 3 months ago. She offered digital consulting services for $50,000. The client forwarded the email to me, asking if I knew this Jennifer Miller and if she was trustworthy. Robert was shaking. What did you tell him? I told him the truth, I replied calmly. That Jennifer had a documented history of dishonesty, that she had been sued for defamation during our divorce, and that I would not recommend her services to anyone who values professional integrity. The horror on their faces was palpable. John, Patricia whispered, that's cruel. Cruel. I repeated, my voice rising for the first time. You want to talk about cruelty? Where were you when Jennifer was systematically destroying my reputation? Where were you when she made up a story about domestic abuse? Where were you when she convinced you to cut me off completely during what should have been the most difficult period of my life? I walked back toward them, stopping directly in front of the sofa. Jennifer made a choice, I said, my voice now completely controlled. She chose to turn our divorce into a war of total destruction. She chose to use you as weapons against me. She chose to spread lies that could have ruined my career. I took the last section of documents from the folder. And now she's discovering that actions have consequences. That when you systematically destroy someone's reputation, especially someone who turns out to be much more influential than you imagined, there's a price to pay. Amanda was crying. But John, she could end up on the street. She might, I agreed. And that would be a direct result of the choices she made. Not mine. I closed the folder and placed it back on the table. You came here expecting me to be the same vulnerable John you abandoned 2 years ago. You expected to find someone desperate for family approval, willing to do anything to win back your love. I smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. Instead, you found someone who learned a valuable lesson, that true family doesn't abandon you. That people who really care check the facts instead of accepting gossip. And that sometimes the best thing that can happen in your life is finding out who's really on your side when the going gets tough. My phone rang. I looked at the screen and smiled genuinely for the first time since they arrived. Excuse me, I said, answering the call. Hi, Dr. Martinez. Yes, the documents were processed earlier today. Perfect. 8 apartments in total? Excellent. You can begin the eviction process tomorrow. I hung up and looked at my family. Their expressions of utter horror told me they understood exactly what that call was about. Jennifer isn't just losing her apartment, I explained calmly. She's going to discover in the next 24 hours that it's impossible to find another rental in Manhattan. You see, when you own or have influence over 63% of the city's mid to high-end residential buildings, it becomes very easy to ensure that certain people simply cannot find suitable housing. The silence that followed was the sound of utter shock. Do you still think, I asked, my voice soft as silk, that you should have come here to ask me to save the woman who tried to destroy me? Robert finally found his voice, though it was only a hoarse whisper. John, you've become a monster. I nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps. Or perhaps I've just become someone who understands that being kind to cruel people is not a virtue. It's weakness. I walked to the living room door and opened it. And now, I said, gesturing toward the hallway, you have a choice to make. If you've been following this impressive transformation from an underestimated man to a ruthless strategist, you won't want to miss how this family confrontation ends, because what John has revealed so far is only the tip of the iceberg of his total reconstruction. They looked at the open door, then at me, then at each other. The reality of what I had become, what I had built during the 2 years of neglect, was finally beginning to sink in. But there was one last card I needed to play. A revelation that would make everything they had just heard seem like mere warm-up for the real show of power. Before you leave, I said, closing the door again, there's one last thing Jennifer is going to find out tomorrow. Something that will make her housing problems the least of her worries. And then I smiled. A smile that carried 2 years of meticulous planning and the icy satisfaction of revenge executed with surgical precision. Jennifer will find out tomorrow, I said, watching their expressions of utter horror, that Miller Tech Solutions has just acquired the company where she got her last job. That job she thought she had earned on her own merit. The silence in the room was deafening. She'll be laid off for operational restructuring on Monday. And when she tries to apply for other positions, she'll discover that her name is on a very specific list that circulates among human resources departments across the East Coast. Patricia was as pale as a sheet. John, that's systematic destruction. It's systematic justice, I corrected her. Jennifer chose to use you as weapons to destroy me emotionally during the 2 most vulnerable years of my life. Now she's finding out what happens when you attack someone who refuses to remain destroyed. I walked to the window one last time, watching Manhattan stretch out endlessly below. Do you want to know the difference between me and Jennifer? I asked, without turning around. When she tried to destroy me, she attacked my character, my reputation, my relationships. Things based on lies and manipulation. I turned to face them. When I destroyed her, I used only the truth. Every missed opportunity, every closed door, every burned bridge was a direct result of the choices she made. I simply made sure that the natural consequences of her actions finally manifested themselves. Robert was shaking. What about us? What happens to us now? I looked at them, this family that abandoned me when I needed support the most, that believed the lies of a manipulator instead of trusting the son and brother they had known for decades. You've learned a valuable lesson today, I said, my voice softer. You've learned that a true family doesn't abandon you based on gossip. That people who truly love you check the truth before cutting ties. And that sometimes the consequences of bad choices take years to fully manifest. I walked to the door and opened it again. You have 2 options, I said. You can walk out of my life permanently, knowing that you chose to believe a sociopath over your own flesh and blood. Or you can genuinely acknowledge the mistake you made and work to rebuild the trust you destroyed. Amanda looked at me with tears in her eyes. How? How do we rebuild this? Start by being honest, I replied. Stop justifying what you did. Stop blaming Jennifer for the fact that you chose to believe her. Take responsibility for your choices and work to become the kind of family that supports unconditionally, rather than abandoning at the first sign of trouble. Patricia slowly stood up. John, we want to try. We want to be a real family. I nodded. Then prove it. Not with words, but with consistent actions over time. And understand that trust, once broken in this way, can take years to rebuild. They left quietly, carrying the weight of understanding what they had lost and the long road ahead of them if they wanted to regain my respect. I closed the door and leaned against it, looking out at my $8 million penthouse. The apartment I had built during the loneliest years of my life, when I learned that sometimes you have to lose a toxic family to discover your own strength. My phone rang. It was a text message from an unknown number. John, please help me. I have no one else. Jennifer. I deleted the message without replying. I walked over to my favorite armchair and sat down, watching the sun set over Manhattan. 2 years ago, I was broken, abandoned, considered a failure by everyone who supposedly loved me. Today, I was a man who had learned that the greatest revenge is not to destroy your enemies, but to build a life so successful that their opinion of you becomes irrelevant. Jennifer discovered that lies have short legs. My family discovered that abandonment has lasting consequences. And I discovered that sometimes losing toxic people is the first step to finding your true strength. If this story of transformation and regaining power has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other incredible stories of people who have turned pain into power and failure into absolute triumph. Because in the end, true success is not proving your enemies wrong about you. It's building a life so extraordinary that it makes it irrelevant whether they were right or wrong.